The world stands at a fragile diplomatic juncture. Russia has put forward a vague new proposal for peace talks, 3 working groups behind closed doors, just days before U.S. President Donald Trump's self-imposed August 8th deadline to resolve the conflict. While Moscow blames inflated expectations for diplomatic setbacks, Washington is turning up the heat. Trump has warned of severe economic measures targeting Russia and its partners if no resolution is reached, all while ordering the deployment of nuclear submarines in response to inflammatory remarks from Moscow. In this a genuine shift towards negotiations or a geopolitical standoff with rising risks? Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The Kiev Independent reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed forming 3 working groups to initiate a new round of talks with Ukraine. The suggested format excludes cameras and public scrutiny, while Putin says would allow for a calm and compromise-driven process. But questions remain about the lack of detail and the continued Russian military activity on the ground. President Trump, meanwhile, has escalated his pressure campaign, warning of sweeping tariffs, not just on Russia, but also on countries like China and India that maintain close ties with Moscow. The U.S. has criticized Russia's missile strike on Kiev as disgusting, marking a sharp change in tone from the White House. The New York Times highlights Putin's claim that stalled peace efforts are due to inflated expectations without directly addressing Trump's ultimatum. The Russian leader reaffirmed that Moscow's conditions remain unchanged: Ukrainian neutrality, territorial concessions, and restrictions on NATO engagement. Trump's envoy is en route to Moscow, and lower-level contacts continue. Yet, some observers warn the Kremlin may be stalling, using diplomacy as a shield while seeking advantage on the battlefield. As Kiev calls for direct leader-to-leader talks, the world waits to see whether either side is truly ready for compromise. Joining us for this debate from Washington, we welcome Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center. And from Moscow, we're joined by Professor Ramil Kalyubi, political science scholar and analyst on Russian foreign affairs. Welcome to Qnews, and I would start with you, Mr. Russell. Now, how do you interpret the timing, structure of Russia's proposed working groups? Is this a breakthrough or just a diplomatic maneuver?
Good to see you, Hala. This is a ploy by Vladimir Putin to buy time. Vladimir Putin is, this is straight out of his playbook. There's really no real rhyme or reason for Vladimir Putin to capitulate to the demands of Washington and Donald Trump. When it comes to economic sanctions, the sanctions haven't really affected Russia up till now. They're still buyers of the oil, which is a major source of their income, and that allows them to continue funding this unprovoked and illegal war. And and as a result, even it's making the BRICS, the actions taken by Donald Trump is just making the BRICS alliance that much stronger. So, is it in the best interest of Vladimir Putin to make these series of working groups really effective? Not really. It could be just political theater.
Dr. Romy, from Moscow's perspective, why insist on closed-door talks with minimal media involvement? I'm talking here about Trump. Does this reflect sincerity or strategic opacity?
Actually, Russia's point of view is that the West is seeking to defeat Russia strategically. And whether Trump, whether Biden, it does not matter because there is an American deep state which is quite anti-Russian. So, under this point of view, Russia thinks that these might be strategic sanctions, but probably Trump is not the only decision maker in the United States, and probably there might be some other challenges. So on this point of view, Russia's position is quite balanced, and we can see that Russia does not criticize Trump directly, but rather criticizes the Western approach towards sanctions policies against Russia.
Mr. Russell, now Trump's August 8th deadline is fast approaching. We're talking here less than a week. In your point of view, is this kind of ultimatum effective diplomacy, or does it risk escalation?
It really depends, Hala, because here's the reason why. It's only as good as, those that are going to abide by it. We've seen this with other, sanctions and deadlines before, that unless the entire global community is on board with it, the sanctions are going to be minimal. It's very provocative language that they're using right now, which kind of escalates it, makes it dangerous. But the deadline is
dangerous
basically
from whose part? From Putin or Trump? The escalation.
Well, for both sides. For both sides.
Okay.
Putin's not doing anything directly. He doesn't have to.
So it's a dual escalation from both sides, in your own opinion.
Yeah, there is absolutely escalation from both sides. You look at the language coming out of Medvedev, and he provokes it, and that gets Donald Trump to provoke even further, to the point of saying that he's redeploying two nuclear submarines to prepare, or just to kind of be ready for whatever escalation might come next out of Moscow. That kind of escalation, that kind of rhetoric doesn't help global security or world peace at all.
Now, Dr. Romy, President Putin has described the West's expectations as, and I quote and unquote, inflated. Is this a fair criticism of Western negotiating strategies?
Partially, yes, because the strategy of Russian negotiations is that, aligned with the negotiations, Russia is continuing to fight on the ground. And a couple of days ago, Russia took Chasiv Yar, important town, under control. And the strategy is that whenever the position is strong on the ground, the position in the negotiation is also strong. So that's why Russia is not in a hurry to start serious peace negotiations, but rather tries to improve its positions on the ground.
Mr. Russell, now Trump has shifted from cautious language to publicly condemning Russia's military strikes. What's behind this rhetorical shift?
Basically, it's the saber rattling. It's to match the rhetoric that's coming out of Moscow. It's only going to escalate from here. Look, the reaction that Donald Trump was expecting when he walked into office 8 months ago is not the reaction that we're seeing now out of Moscow. When Donald Trump ran, he said he was going to have the Ukraine question settled in 48 hours. We had such a good relationship. There was a lot of respect between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin doesn't respect Donald Trump. If he did, this would be a different situation. But what we're seeing is Russia basically flexing its muscles regarding Ukraine.
And you don't see the United States as flexing its muscles as well?
Well, look, we've got to look at one thing here, Hala, and that is the fact that this is a global response being led in certain areas by the United States against an illegal, unprovoked, and inhumanitarian war and an invasion which violates UN Charter and violates international law, and an invasion by Russia into Ukraine, unprovoked. And this was the biggest form of escalation that Moscow could take. It originally drew the immediate ire of the global community against Russia. It had initial effects on the Russian economy, on the Russian people. But as this war has drawn out, those effects have become less and less. There are still people buying oil from Russia. There's still people that are trying to find loopholes around current sanctions. And, even some of
We're talking here about China and India, of course.
I'm sorry, Hala?
China and India, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which were slammed as well by Trump for these reasons that you mentioned, Mr. Russell.
Well, exactly, Hala. And the thing about this is, when you look at the reaction, instead of taking and honing in the focus on Russia, on what we can do to push back Russia's illegal aggression in Ukraine and stop the innocent loss of life, what's happening is now Trump is putting secondary sanctions possibly on two of our biggest trading partners globally, and that being India and China. That, I don't think, was a very well thought out strategy. And I think what's happening now is that the Trump administration is now having to really rapidly shift its attention and its strategy in dealing with Russia and Ukraine. They're having to shift now because the decisions of not fully backing and not being 100% supportive of Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainian defense of that country is now starting to come back and haunt this administration. It could be too little too late, and rhetoric and escalation that's unneeded.
Yes, you're right. Dr. Romi, now despite direct contact with the US, Putin has not personally responded to Trump's deadline. Is this intentional signaling?
Actually, there might be some personal contacts between Putin and Trump. We cannot exclude it. And there were more than 5 telephone calls which were held since Trump came back to the White House. So generally, we can note that sometimes Trump changes his position very quickly. So first he talked about 50 days, then 10 days. Now he can say that he would give more time because actually Trump is a businessman and more than a politician, and very often such statements are made emotionally and not really well studied.
Mr. Russell, now President Donald Trump ordered nuclear submarines deployed in response to comments from Dmitry Medvedev. How should this move be interpreted?
It should be interpreted as exactly what it is. We've heard Vladimir Putin say before, early on, when things weren't going exactly Russia's way in this war, Vladimir Putin said he was not against, if he had to, using tactical nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin has continued to push that mantra when things kind of get pushed back and go against his strategy in Ukraine. So this is completely self-inflicted by the Russians. When the two largest nuclear powers, let me say this, when the two largest nuclear powers come together and they start butting heads in the court of public opinion and in the media, what's going to happen is that's the rhetoric escalates to a point where, when do we believe them and when do we don't believe them? Are we to believe that, Vladimir Putin has not taken the idea of using tactical nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe off the table? Is he threatening to use nuclear weapons? He has done this and has continued to do that, either himself or through Medvedev. So, of course, Washington is going to respond by strategically placing military assets that are going to defend against possible external aggression by the Russians. This is escalating unnecessarily, and the onus of that escalation falls solely, and the responsibility falls solely on Moscow because of the selfish, imperialistic, and aggressive nature of Vladimir Putin and what he wants, which isn't in the best interests of the region or global security.
Okay, so this is the American point of view. I want to listen to Dr. Romi. Now, Lavrov described recent U.S.-Russia talks as fruitful. I quote and unquote. He said fruitful. Based on developments so far, do you think that there is real progress behind that? There is real substance behind this description as fruitful?
Actually, first of all, I have a small remark. As the guest mentioned that Putin is an aggressor and so on. This is the Western point of view, but there is also a Russian point of view which says that it was possible to avoid the war in Ukraine in case if NATO took into consideration Russian security concerns. As for progress in the negotiations, there is almost no progress, and even the progress is related to some humanitarian issues and not end of the conflict. So we can expect that the intense fighting would continue for a few more months until the geopolitical situation changes and one of the parties would be ready to give or to sacrifice some interests in order to end the war.
Mr. Russell, now public support for Trump's Russia campaign seems very mixed. If no results materialize by August the 8th, could this backfire politically?
I think it's unclear, Salma, and here's why. It depends on some of the other issues that are drawing the American electorate and their attention away from this sometimes. The bottom line here is that Donald Trump has now gone all in on backing Ukraine. This is in coordination with our NATO partners. This is in coordination with a large population of support that we get globally for continuing support for this. But I think what's going to happen is politically, Donald Trump's got other problems here at home that is going to draw the attention away, which in all honesty is a good thing for the Washington's Ukraine policy right now. The one thing I do want to add here real quick, Selma, is the fact that Steve Witkoff, some in Washington either love him or hate him. Steve Witkoff is very, very effective. He's a very, very effective negotiator. This is a guy who hasn't been a career diplomat, but somehow has the charm, the understanding, and the strategy to really make an impression. He's been effective, I would argue, in the Gaza situation, trying to get a solution there. I think he could be a very effective tool for Donald Trump in trying to see and trying to de-escalate the situation between Moscow and Washington and trying to come to a ceasefire in Ukraine. So I think it's going to be very interesting over the next 72 to 96 hours to see exactly how effective Steve Witkoff is going to be to convey the message from Washington to Vladimir Putin and to Vladimir Zelensky. Look, this has to end. This is becoming way too dangerous. At some point, this is going to boil over, and that helps nobody. This ends now.
We'll just have to wait and see what Witkoff will be able to do. Now, Dr. Rami Zelensky has called for direct talks between the leaders. Do you see any scenario where the Kremlin agrees to a Zelensky-Putin summit, especially after U.S. envoy Witkoff comes into the scene?
I don't think that Russia would agree, because Russia had clarified many times that would be and as at the last stage, not as a first step.
Okay. Mr. Russell, following Trump's tariff threat, India has reduced Russian oil imports. What does this signal in terms of global realignments?
Well, what it does signal is, as I pointed out earlier, that this is a risky move by Washington. If President Modi is making the decision that, hey, you know what, maybe we need to back off buying Russian oil, even as economically beneficial it will long term, it's not a good strategy. I think we'll see other players in the region probably make that decision.
Such as?
This is a Well, I mean, we look at this could put pressure on China. If we put secondary sanctions on Chinese products being imported to the United States, I've spoken many times on this network about how intertwined the two economies are. If you're talking about your biggest export partner in the United States, and you're going to risk getting secondary sanctions on those products that are going into the U.S., if they're not buying that, that really hurts the Chinese economy. Xi Jinping's not a moron. He's going to look at that very closely, and I think that's going to be a pressure point for further economic pressure on Moscow. The bottom line here is this has become kind of a very dynamic and tactical situation right now diplomatically between Moscow, Washington, Moscow, and Kyiv, and then all the other partners. The question is, can they come up with just the right pieces of the puzzle to fit together perfectly to see a peaceful and a less drawn out time frame for a solution to this crisis? And
I see that you see that Steve Witkoff is the man who's going to bring all these little pieces of the puzzle together, don't you?
Look, Selma, as many times as I've been, as we've talked, and I am not a huge fan of the Trump administration when it comes to its foreign policy. I think I do have to believe, and I do have to give them credit, that the one tool that they have available to them, and an effective tool, is in fact Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff has even surprised me in his ability to truly at least set the groundwork for what could be constructive dialogue in trying to find a solution to complex conflicts like what we're seeing between Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of crossed fingers in Washington that this comes to an end, because this is another negative distraction that the Trump administration does not need. But I think, yes, to your original point, I think Steve Witkoff could be very effective in at least getting everybody to the table.
Okay. Dr. Rami, now Russia is reportedly advancing on several fronts. Does this give Moscow confidence to dictate terms, or does it raise new risks? Mr. Rami, can you hear me? Okay, I believe we lost Dr. Rami now, so I'll go back to Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell, now Donald Trump's mention of secondary sanctions on China and India adds more volatility. Could this isolate the U.S. diplomatically, not only economically?
No, well, let me rephrase that. Yes, it could. This could backfire. We've been pointing out at the center that the risk of massive secondary sanctions against those that are buying Russian oil. And as we pointed out earlier, that we're talking about China, we're talking about India, we're talking about South Korea even to an extent. Those are big trading partners. Now, in the case of India and China, India and China are the I in the C in the BRICS alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And the BRICS alliance has been making maneuvers and is becoming very, very strategic in how they're flexing their influence around the world. We saw President Modi and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announce the biggest trade agreement between India and Britain in its history. So we're starting to see BRICS make some maneuvers. And this is based, and this is not in reaction to the Ukraine situation. This is actually in response to the Trump tariff policy. And what they're doing is they're showing that there's alternatives, trading alternatives to the U.S. If that's the case, then that kind of means that could the secondary sanctions backfire on the U.S.? This is how it could backfire. If the convergence of Trump's tariff policy and Trump's Ukraine policy come together, it could collide into a very economic problem for the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. And I want to elaborate from you also, Mr. Russell, about Steve Witkoff's role in this regard. Now, Witkoff is heading to Moscow. So can these unofficial channels produce meaningful results, or they're just symbolic?
That's a very good question, Zola. And I think what we're seeing is the answer is kind of a little bit of both.
Somewhere in between. I expected that.
Yes. And here's why. Is when you send somebody as kind of a back channel, and I use air quotes, unofficial player, going to talk and bring a message from outside of government, it kind of allows that message to be either more blunt or a lot more nuanced, if you will, than some formal diplomatic channels that would handle foreign ministry to State Department. Mm-hmm. So in that case, this is where Steve Witkoff, I think, can be effective. The question now is, what is the message that Witkoff is bringing? If Steve Witkoff is going in there trying to say, look, we'll make a deal, you can have half of Ukraine, then that's going to make it very, very difficult for our NATO partners to buy on, and could continue to isolate the U.S. from our European partners.
Diplomatically or economically, or both?
Both. Mm-hmm. Both. The strange thing is here that we're seeing right now is the convergence of diplomacy and economic policies that are literally driving forces in what is happening on a global stage. As we've seen, the economic decisions being made by Washington have had a very keen effect on the diplomatic policies that we're seeing between the question in Ukraine and the U.S. It's put a little bit of a wedge between our NATO partners and us. We've seen a dynamic shift of the relationship between our European partners and NATO and the U.S. And it kind of drove Donald Trump and the Trump administration from going from strictly a Vladimir Putin, situation in the Oval Office to all of a sudden now we're wholly backing the Ukraine effort. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and they actually come together because did somebody get mad because of the terrorist decision, or is somebody getting a little bit upset because of the fact that NATO backs Ukraine and Donald Trump looks like he's buddy-buddy with Vladimir Putin? It's a very fluid dynamic.
And Mr. Russell, if Trump's deadline passes without progress, what options are realistically on the table for Washington?
Oh.
How would it go? Because this is very likely to happen, You've just mentioned that Vladimir Putin is very stubborn, and there are high potentials that the deadline would pass without any breakthrough. So what if this happens?
Look, is it a very distinct possibility? You're absolutely correct. It is a very distinct possibility.
Mhm.
The question then becomes is what happens. The problem here is that we have two immovable forces. We have an immovable force in Donald Trump, in Donald Trump's ego, and Donald Trump's ability to want to be seen as being the most respected leader in the world.
Mm.
Vladimir Putin disrupts that, and that's a problem.
Mm.
So does Vladimir Putin continue to quietly and I point this out because this is a very important point. Vladimir Putin hasn't been doing the talking. He's been using Medvedev and even some of the political commentators and Russian media to do his bidding. So he kind of sits back and takes a very powerful, view
Stance.
of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't have to move on it because he's got people doing his talking. That's not Donald Trump's motive.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is going to continue to be out front and say, people respect me. You're going to respect me. Yeah. And when they don't, what's the next move?
We'll just have to wait. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Exactly, Summer. That's very true.
I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, joining us from Washington, and also extend my thanks to Mr. Ramil Qalyoubi from Moscow. Thank you so much for your valuable insights and, of course, perspectives that have helped us navigate a complex and evolving diplomatic and economic moment with depth and balance. Thank you so much. And as the clock ticks towards President Trump's deadline and Moscow offers its latest diplomatic formula, the road to resolution remains unclear, as we said. Between threats of economic pressure and opaque proposals for dialogue, the path to peace, if it exists, may rest not only on what's said at the negotiating table, but also on what remains unsaid behind closed doors. What's certain is that the cost of continued conflict weighs heaviest on civilians, and that global expectations, however inflated some may claim, will not vanish in silence. This has been Think Tank. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching and joining us. Stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.